We're all at the expense of losing, population in terms of registration. So they're very interesting. Now this page is a little bit different. This is Asian and Hispanic are much. There's also, they have a presence, some counties more than others, but you can see with them similarly, the green portion is where they saw the significant change, a heavy move to being unaffiliated, so not saying I'm with one party or another. But what you will also see in both of these groups is the portion of them that actually a registered Republican actually got smaller. So while Native Americans and white voters actually increased in Republican registration, these two populations did not, and actually saw a decrease, along with the blue affiliation Democratic. And this is a page that is probably more like the state in general. The state in general has fewer, it's roughly a little bit, I think there's more registered Democrats in North Carolina, but it's a little closely evenly matched. And then much bigger growth in as unaffiliated voters. So this is definitely very interesting. That points us to how 2020 worked, because some of these counties, and if I had like one county chart like this one, for example, like Anson County, which is a small rural county, in 2008, everyone was a registered Democrat. It didn't matter what race. Well over 50% of the white voters were registered Democrats. You get to 2020, and white voters in Anson are now mostly Republican and unaffiliated. So, I mean, just a complete reversal over these 12 years of how they are identified. And then this is our kind of the focus of our work is, one, things are changing, and that's just kind of more for information. But the next pieces are, who's actually turning out to vote. And you hear a lot about this historic turnout in 2008, 2020, and it was a big number, but it actually wasn't a big number for all populations. So the chart on the left, just 2020, looks at the white voter turnout in these our seven focus counties versus those voters of color. So African American, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American, and others. And as you can see, in all but one county, there is a pretty significant difference in terms of how that turnout was by these populations. So, and when I look at this, and we have the same data from 08 to 20, and so when I'm talking to them, I actually look at the trend. It's very clear, like this is not like, the high watermark for Black voters and was actually 2008 and 2012. This was not a historic turnout. What was historic was 08 and 12, when Black women in every single county crushed voter turnout. Union County, which is it's the lowest in terms of minority population in Moore County, but in 2008, Union County, Black women had over an 80% voter turnout. I think it was 83%. And so, as you can see, this blend is going to tell you how things have changed. Now, when you look at 16 versus 20, it's definitely up, and it was much better, but there's definitely opportunity. And if you look at young voters on the other side, it's a similar kind of thing. Like this was not high. I mean, it was up, and it was definitely helpful, but 8 years ago, 12 years ago, young voters voted at higher rates. And so what this says to me is there's opportunity, because if these folks, and I have here at the bottom, like what this turnout means in terms of who wins or loses at the end of the day, and the kind of policies that are going to be pushed. Former Chief Justice Sherry Beasley, she's actually running for Senate now, but it's not an endorsement of her campaign, but she was running for re-election, and she lost by less than 500 votes. And that was out of 5 million cast. And a lot of times people count out these rural counties, but any of these counties, we also have the numbers in every one of these counties of how many people didn't vote. But if you look at in some total, 56,000 people of color didn't vote. Those folks in large numbers voted for Chief Justice Sherry Beasley. Any one of these counties, if we had even a slightly higher voter turnout, would have made the difference in that race. And even in some of their races, in Richmond County, there was a county commissioner who lost on their 4 seats, and the top 3 won. An African-American man, and he lost by like 100 votes. And in Richmond County, there was probably maybe 7,000 African-Americans who didn't vote in that election, in the general last year. So we believe that these populations are where, progressive energies are and should be focused. And these rural counties, as some of the, the parties don't pay attention to because they feel like they're too small. Well, they're not too small to impact, elections. And when you look at who's in these higher positions, they got their start in rural counties. So we focus a lot on local and on local, opportunities. And then the last page of data I'll have is, what does this combination of this party affiliation, difference in voter turnout, what does it mean to an actual candidate? So Elaine Marshall is Secretary of State in North Carolina. She has been in office in all 4 of these presidential elections. North Carolina votes for its statewide seats on the presidential years. And look at how her numbers have changed. These are whole counties. This is not gerrymandering. This is how the results have changed. We have our second. She's a Secretary of State. Our state auditor. We have a chart like this. She also has been on the ballot all these times. Elaine Marshall, she ran for U.S. Senate. So there's no name recognition issue. People know her. And she got 70% of the vote in these 5 counties. She's down to 51.9. When we look at these counties individually, she lost some of these counties. Like, she didn't win in 2020. She did ultimately win and maintain her seat, but in a much smaller margin than she'd been winning historically. And so a chart like this is a combination of who's turning out to vote and who isn't, and how people their ideology has been changed, and those folks whose ideology may not have been changed, they're just not turning out to vote at the numbers you need for these, a candidate like her, would she win in 2024? So I think that's my last data page. Any questions on this data? I know I was a lot. It can be a lot. So I'll just pause and see if you guys have any questions, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about what our strategy is and, how we are working to make changes. Anthony.
Hey, Cynthia, thanks. Yeah, I was curious about and by the way, I sent you a chat about this. I ran in the 9th district as well in 2018, but it was Virginia's 9th, which is the rural South.
I've read about you as well. I've seen some of your work. So when I saw you, I'm like, I've read about you when I was running. So yes.
Cool. So I was wondering about this unaffiliated. In Southwest Virginia and much of rural Virginia, Virginia does not register by party. It's all nonpartisan registration. But people will say they're independent, but in much of Southwest Virginia, when somebody says they're independent, nowadays there's about an 80% chance they're voting Republican most of the time. I'm wondering if you have any data or even anything anecdotal about that shift to unaffiliated. Does that really kind of mean a shift to the right or no?
I think it depends on where. Because what's interesting, and I say it because there's no real quick answer. Yeah. So for example, in a Union County, and this is all blended, and the reason I actually don't have Union on this chart is it doesn't tell the same story. So Union County is a suburb of Mecklenburg, which is where Charlotte is. And so Union County still has a pretty high unaffiliated population, but they actually are going less red, even though they're still a red county. And we do believe it's definitely because of that suburban shift. Yeah. So you'll see that change, while they're still winning mostly red seats, they're actually helping the state more for progressive candidates. Okay. So I think it depends. And then in these rural places, though, I do think that is where you're probably seeing that red shift, or younger voters. And I still haven't done this. It's on my to-do list. I need a data person. So if you guys don't know anybody, I got to build this organization because I can't spend as much time on this. But also in the, say the minority groups or the people of color, like African American, a lot of the younger voters just don't attach themselves to parties. And we're learning that too in the focus groups. And well, I learned it in my own family. Family of tried and true Democrats, but the younger ones are not feeling it. So I think some of it is not necessarily that they're, conservative. They're also just not interested in the parties.
Okay.
And then it is probably part of that move, though, from some people, like, I don't necessarily want to become a Republican, but I'll just go unaffiliated. Right. And so then I'll just jump into the last, section, which is kind of, how are we going to change these things? How do we think we can do it? So we have what we've called our three-pronged strategy, which, as we say, begins and ends with listening. Listening. That's the other thing that, we hear in the rural places is, no one's listening to them. And the thing I think about, like these counties and other counties in North Carolina in particular, and in Georgia, I'm from Georgia, so I know that case as well, is sometimes when people talk about rural, they're talking about, non-minority rural people. And so no one, like they don't feel listened to. The African Americans, Hispanics that live in these places, no one really is talking about them and talking to them and listening to them. So we're doing a lot of work. You'll see on the next couple of pages how we're doing that part of our strategy. And then we feel the key, though, after we listen and respond, is increasing their civic and electoral engagement so that they will now feel like they can participate in making their lives different by engaging. And so the listening side, as I mentioned, we've got 7 counties. And one of the things for us is we already had these great relationships there. And so we've taken those relationships and are building new relationships, particularly people who are maybe not political. That really is like, I find kind of a win when I have built a new relationship with someone that does nothing connected to politics, but they care about their community. And so we've held meetings, like all that data I went through, with community leaders, people who are in fraternities, sororities, owners of food banks, and faith leaders, other nonprofit leaders. And we kind of walk through, we talk about who we are, which is what I spent a few minutes about. And then we go through that data that I kind of shared with partisan move and how people have voted and turned out by demographics, race, gender, and age. We walk them through that for their specific county. And then we really, the most important part about it is we sit and listen. So it's about an hour and a half. It's been an hour and a half call. We talk for about 30, 40 minutes of that. And then we ask them to respond to what they've seen. So we've done that for these 7 counties. It took us about 3 months. I was a little more, I thought it was going to take us a month and a half. And of course, these things take a little longer, especially in the age of Zoom. And these are a couple of things that we've heard so far. And these are obviously from the engaged people. These are voters. These are, but young people in particular, they don't feel like people will listen to them. People will talk to them, but they don't listen and hear what they have to say. As I mentioned earlier, they don't care about parties. They don't care about candidates. They're focused on, do you care about my issues? And that lack of economic opportunity. And that economic opportunity means jobs and wages, but it also means there's literally nothing to do here. I don't have anything else to do to enjoy life where I live. And then when you talk to, people of color, voting and nothing's changing, or there places that are accessible, and, social issues. The Lumbee voters are actually a little more conservative. And so these issues of abortion, guns, et cetera, actually have been used in the population like that to scare. Yes, Erica.
Opportunity coming up a lot. And I was wondering, going back to the charts you showed us before of the loss of Democratic voters, if that corresponds to like an increase in poverty and unemployment in those counties.
So we've got 7 counties. 5 of the 7 in North Carolina, they have this tier system, and it's 3 tiers, and it's based on unemployment, poverty, population changes. So of those five are all like, you know, the tiers are like being number one is actually not good. They're tier one. So 5 of those 7 are in that tier one. So that top 15 to 20 of 100 counties in those high poverty, high unemployment. So some of it's been generational. It didn't just happen. Robinson County, where the Columbia are, they actually are they go between 1 and number 2 of the most poverty stricken in the entire state. Right now, they're the lowest COVID vaccinated county of 100. You know, and so some of it is it's kind of continued to happen. I think there's probably been a concerted effort though to reach out to them and on those social things that I think has caused some of the shift. The other piece, though, I say, and I bounce around a little bit, but if you look at this number, right, like the turnout of this is primarily Lumbee and African Americans, they actually only turned out at 57%. And white voters there turned out at 70%. And when you stack age on top of these race numbers, there are populations of, in Robinson County in particular, African American and Lumbee under 40, their turnout's like 30 to 40%. So I don't think it's all that they're voting differently. A lot of some is that they're just not even voting. Like they have totally become apathetic about the process. So I think it's that combination of the apathy, and maybe it is the last, so many years and not feeling like some of the changes they thought would happen have occurred. And, and then and even if it's on the margins where you're picking off people to vote conservative, it can make a big difference when turnouts are low on the people that might respond to progressive things because they're just not hearing from them. And those that are truly just voting differently. Like I saw the, African-American Trump voter live and in person on the campaign trail on election day. They were still few and far between, but if you pick that off and then the African-American voter turnout in general isn't high, then it can make a very, big difference. And speaking of focus groups, I was a couple minutes late because it was literally just having conversation with the group who has done this research for us. So we have hired a national research firm that is doing more of that listening. That 7-county thing where those are the people that are telling us what they hear in their communities. But we really wanted to talk to people who did not vote. And so we have worked with Change Research, and they have completed 2 focus groups of Black men and women, each unique, as well as direct interviews, in-depth interviews with Hispanic and Lumbee voters. And it includes some Democratic registered people who voted Republican in the last election. So we literally just had the call. I just came off of it where they're kind of walking us through some of the summary of those findings. We did get a chance to listen in on the focus groups, Helen and I. And so they're summarizing this, and we will definitely have a lot more information on that on November 4th or 8th. So I don't know, Erica, whomever, I will get you guys that link where we will be, sharing those findings with interested folks. And it is also a fundraiser for our opportunity to really build the kind of momentum we need to do, this work of making change, and also Helen and I, we look at this is not a one election thing. This is not a one cycle. This is going to be, a continuous effort of listening and investing and really focus on people's issues. I will give you a highlight though, a couple things that, like I said, I'm just coming out of a meeting with them. Even in the current environment, what all 4 groups and the 3 racial groups talked about is they don't care about all this bipartisan stuff. They want things to get done. And like, that's definitely part of what we, I kind of walked away, is they want to feel like the politicians are getting things done. And they don't feel like that's happening right now. And the other, when we talk about civic, and these are my last 2 quick pages, I'll fly through these and, take some questions, additional ones. for us as well, like, what we also hear is people care about, folks who want to, deal with their issues. And we know that lack of healthcare and difficulties with healthcare is a big issue. And of course, right now, one of the biggest threats to healthcare is not being vaccinated and access to that. And so we have started that work in these rural counties, and we're working on one in Robinson County right now, which is number one at the bar, actually number 100 in rank of vaccinated folks in North Carolina. But Union County, we went to a rural part and we partnered with some of these new relationships we built. And not only, did vaccinations, but we made sure everything was translated in English and Spanish. And our work, we've worked with Made to Save, which is an initiative of Civic Nation, which is Michelle Obama's organization. And they've recognized our work and gave us our first grant, which we were excited about. But to help us continue this work. And so we're working on Robinson County, as I mentioned. And then beyond that, creating that in-depth connection between civic engagement and life, not just voting, but what are the other ways that, politics and, and this stuff impacts your life, and more of it's local. It's those local elections. It is also those zoning and planning boards and those kind of things. And so how do we create a program, which we're working on is a civic education program, to bring that to life for folks? And we're going to take, the way we look at it, we've got folks, we're going to move from a non-voter to a voter, and someone from a voter to an engaged person, and an engaged person eventually to a leader that's actually running for office. And so taking people on that continuum and meeting them where they are. And then also, we're looking forward to, before the end of the year, starting some deep canvassing to those people who didn't vote in 2020. So Anson County is in our crosshairs. There are only 2,500 people of color, Black and Hispanic, who didn't vote in Anson. With a few volunteers and some paid canvassers, we can knock on all those doors and actually have an in-depth conversation with them. And our goal is to hopefully do that before the town elections occur in November, to really start that, knowledge and understanding from the folks who no one ever comes and knocks on their doors. And so we want to be that group that does it. So that's kind of where we are, what we're trying to do. And
Cynthia,
I'd love to open for any questions.
That's fabulous. If you would stop sharing your screen, and we'll just open it up for a few more minutes of questions.
I have a question.
Yep.
Cynthia, that was great. I loved it. I love all the data. I have a question regarding your data. And when you were looking at the under 40 voter population, and Robinson County or Robinson County, I guess that's how you pronounce it, had a significant drop. Have you looked at any of youth flight from those counties? Has there been a change in the demographics, the age demographics in those counties? And is that correlated, or is that incorporated into your outcome data there?
So we have had some, we actually contracted with a group, Blue Bonnet, and they did some census work. It was before the 2020. So we need to refresh it because we didn't have that newest work. You are seeing some movement in these counties, particularly younger people moving away. What's also interesting though, they actually are getting browner. And I think some of that flight actually has been larger in the white population as well. What's also interesting, like I said, I've got data 20 million ways to nothing, but we look at when you add like race and gender. What's also very interesting in that under 40 population, white younger voters actually did have higher turnout in 2020. Mm-hmm. Hispanic, African American, their voter turnout actually declined. And it's on a continual, like from 2016 to 20, they actually didn't vote in a higher number. Like they voted actually in some cases lower rates than they voted in 2016. And so there is a big disconnect in those populations, and they're still there, but they are just not, like, just totally disengaging from this part of, their life. Mm-hmm. It's very concerning.
Others.
I have one, but I'll hold off for someone who hasn't asked one yet, if there's anyone else. No. Okay. Well, I was wondering about whether you have the data on income level and voting propensity.
So we don't have that in this, because this data was all electoral. We do have access because we have joined a collective now in North Carolina of other 501c4 that are progressive organizations. And so we have that data, access to that data now. So we have not started to dig into it, but we do, have it. But you can definitely see, like, if you looked at that chart from, without even having the data, voter turnout is directly correlated to socioeconomic status. Like if you plotted the counties just side by side, Union and Monroe and Moore are like wealthier counties within this rural contingency, and their turnouts are like 10 points higher. And even when you take even in the races, African Americans in Union County, where the incomes are a bit higher, have the highest turnout of all 7. So even within racial populations, you can see a difference in that engagement, even within races.
And do you have a sense that like Democratic Party officials are aware of that dynamic? That like poor people by and large are just dropping off the radar?
I don't think so. I don't think at the level they need to be, I will say. I mean, you see a lot of the strategy it continues to be the same. And actually, I wager as well, and I'm not focused on Mecklenburg because nobody's focused on these rural places. So I just feel like this is where I can make an impact. But even in a Mecklenburg County, which is urban county, you see those same disparities of African American voter turnout and white voter turnout. And when you look at the map of the city and where there's higher income populations and the more poverty, you see that same gulf. And so a lot of these turnout rates are very comparable to an urban county. Like just because they're in the, if you put them side by side, they wouldn't be that different. And so I think it's that economics. We did hear like the top 3 issues, and I bet if they did a focus group of urban African American women and women, it would be the same. It's economics. I mean, that's their number one concern. And I think they feel like this voting isn't addressing it. Like that's not fixing it.
Well, they're right about that, right? I mean, it
Right.
hasn't been fixing it. So
It hasn't been fixing the issue. The other thing too, like what was interesting, we were listening to the focus groups, Helen and I, they were talking about current policies, like how are you feeling they're impacting your life? Folks weren't clear about who was voting for those policies. Like they literally, while they kind of liked the child tax credit, it didn't feel as impactful and transformative as it's being described, but also they believe that both parties voted for it to happen. Like they don't give one party the credit over the other. And so that's a communication issue as well. Like it's not clear to them that this group, is the one that's making those actual policy things that have helped you be able to, because they asked the moderator, she said, well, what have you been able to do? And this one lady said, well, I, was able to pay my rent, but they're not crediting that to this administration and Democrats. Like, they're like, I think they all work together to make it happen. And of course, we can't say anything. We want to jump through the screen and say, no, not one Republican in Congress in North Carolina voted for that. None of them did. But, so.
Cynthia, we're going to need to wrap up to do our business.
Yep.
There's time for maybe one more question. Anyone? I'll ask one last one and then we'll wrap up, which is in your focus groups. I know you're still kind of processing the data you got from that. Was there anything specific about the Democratic Party to help account for the movement away from Democrats, either towards Republicans in some cases or just towards unaffiliated for the most part. I think it's clear that there's a general sense that politics isn't working for me. It's not doing anything to address my needs. Totally get that. But did they call out the Democratic Party either for policy or action in any specific ways or no?
Well, we did ask about both parties. So we did ask that question specifically, like, what do you think when you hear Democrats? What do you think about them? What do you think about Republicans? What do you think they think about you? You know, and so they generally did feel like the Democrats care about the working person. They care about, those kind of things. And they said the Republicans care about the rich and money and wealth, and they were clear about that. But they didn't feel clear about what the Democrats really stood for.
Okay.
Like, they didn't feel like, while they didn't like the Republicans, they felt clear, like it was clearer too, like, what are they about? And like I said, I think they feel like the Democrats, they did talk about infighting. Like a couple of the groups talked about, it felt like there was a lot of infighting. It felt like they don't seem like that bipartisan, they perceived as being weak and not strong. And like they used the word soft about the Democrats, and so that was definitely some of what they said. They didn't feel like they were strong in, like, okay, they believe something, but what are they doing with those beliefs to make things happen?
That's interesting. Yeah.
So we'll definitely, like I said, we're going to have more and look forward to, inviting you guys to hopefully join us. And I love what you guys are doing. So however, we can partner with you guys as well beyond, me doing all this talking. I love to do more listening to what you guys are doing in the next time.
Well, you're welcome to stay on. We've got about 20 minutes to crank through some important business. So please do. And that'll help give you a sense of where our preoccupations are right now. I think JD had to get off. Jalicia, you're also more than welcome to stay on. So, but first a quick, just again, a thank you to Cynthia. This was really
so
fabulous.
much.
And
That
all
was
this for a 6-month-old organization. Very impressive. Really, really cool. So that's just great. Thank you so much. There's no question we want to be connected with you and work with you going forward probably at multiple levels. I'm going to just very quickly summarize what's changed since the last meeting and see if we can have some quick conversations and make sure we're all on the same wavelength. First thing is we now have an operational website, right, Erica? Is that right? Yes.
Yes.
And I think,
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, please do. So all of you had a moment. We didn't give you a lot of time, but a moment to weigh in on whether you had any issues or discomfort with any pieces of it. We're really excited for that. And the same actually it's two different young ladies that put this together, but another person under contract for barely any money has put together some really good promotional materials, which are, I'd say, 90% done, Erica, or are they ready to go?
90%.
90%. So those two things are both helping us to raise our profile a little bit, like the New Rural Project. We're brand new, and we've been operating, as you guys know, without any financial support to speak of. So now those two things, the presence of the website and some materials that can be either electronically forwarded or printed and shared at meetings, at gatherings, at convenings, all of those should really help begin to build our name recognition and build the possibility of lots more partnerships. So that's one thing. Anything else to say about the website and or the promo materials, Erica or Cody? Erica's done a huge amount of work on that, by the way.
Just it'd be good if everyone wants to do the sign up, put your email in and sign up for the newsletter. That would be good. Not that we have a newsletter yet, but so that when we do, you'll get it.
Yeah.
And we can make sure it's all working properly too.
And I would say that once you familiarize yourself a little bit more with the website, if you're comfortable, we would also encourage you to encourage people in your networks to go to the website and sign up. I have a group of a little over 1,000 people that are kind of my campaign remnant, and a few other people I've picked up that I do a semi-regular newsletter for. I'm going to encourage all of them to go to the Ruby website. And so that's another way to build kind of the base of people. So we now are probably 1 to 2 weeks away from receiving money. And at the September meeting, we discussed some of the complications involved with the work. I think all of you know we have 4 basic goals we've laid out for Ruby over the next year. One of them is to continue the education and training around the rural-urban divide, how we got here, what we do about it. That's the kind of ongoing work, expanding that. There's a work group for that. Second one is the one Cody's been leading on our candidates, evaluating which candidates of a progressive leaning to some degree fare better than would be expected in rural areas. That process is well underway, and soon we'll begin interviews. That's what was being discussed just as the meeting was started. The third one is around other rural organizing groups. That area is a little less clear where we're going, but still basically to reach out and talk to projects like the Wisconsin Farmers Union, the New Rural Project, et cetera. And then the last is around the linkage to rural development practice and policy and community work. So we have laid out those 4 goals. We've been working on those 4 goals. Now, starting in a couple of weeks, we're going to have $90,000 to work on those 4 goals, which is not a ton of money, but when you've had like 0, it seems like a lot of money. So here's the main thing I want to bring up. We need more of a structure. We still are not an incorporated organization. We're working through a 501c3, Appalachian Peace Education Center, for the 501c3 funds. And then we're working through my for-profit consulting business, Scale Incorporated, for the 501c4 funds. We're basically developing a plan for staffing the implementation of these 4 goals. And it's going to be a mix of employees and subcontractors, probably more, well, almost for sure, more of the latter, the subcontractors, but we're going to be doing that. All of these will be part-time, some of them very part-time. And what we would like to come back to you with over the next couple of weeks is a plan for how we see that breaking out. Both of our funders, the Just Transition Fund with Heidi Binko and the Rural Democracy Initiative with Sarah Janes, are really supportive of this work and about as flexible as funders can be in allowing us to do this in the way we need to do it. So we're not looking at lots of parameters and boxes to check, and it's not like having a USDA or an EPA grant. It's pretty fluid. But nevertheless, we need some clarity and some structure, and we believe that one of the things that needs to happen is we need to create a steering committee of Ruby, so that we'll have Ruby members, which is all of you and a few others, but then we'll probably need a steering committee, which is a subset that actually ensures that the work is being done and that just does the things that boards and steering committees do. So Erica, Cody, and I, who've been functioning as a kind of a core staff team up to this point, will put something out to you for your thoughts and suggestions in terms of this structure. But let me just pause there and see if anybody has any questions about the grants, any concerns about kind of how we're approaching it at this point, this idea of a Ruby steering committee and staff. Any questions or concerns? Everybody's good with it? Okay, cool. So I guess the next step will be for us to give you that plan in a little bit more detail. And yeah. Cody, Erica, anything to add to that?
No, I think those are the next steps.
Okay. So really, that's that's the lion's share of the business. The other piece I will just remind folks on is that our working groups, we have one for each of the 4 goals. We're not dropping them. What instead we see the staff or the subcontractors that we're going to be bringing on in the next few weeks as people who certainly can spearhead that work, but will be working with the working groups to make sure we do the best possible job on each of those 4 goals. So if you signed up for one of those working groups, please know that we'll continue to rely on you to help make those things happen. That's really all I have business-wise. I'll again toss it back to Erica and Cody. Anything I've missed that we need to discuss in this part of the meeting?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we could just mention that, like, part of, like, as we're transitioning to a more formal structure, like, we're pretty clear that at least part of what we do is going to have to be 501c4, and that part can remain 501c3. But like our project with interviewing candidates and creating a report for that, it's become very clear as we've moved that along that it's truly a partisan endeavor. There's no hiding it. And so rather than trying to, fudge it and pretend that is C3 work, we were actually able to, RDI was actually able to give us a grant from its C4 fund. So we're good on that. But it's just going to be a little bit of a thing that we're going to have to be mindful of over time, is sort of how to kind of keep that firewall. If a lot of groups do this, have a hybrid C3, C4, but it's not without its challenges. So yeah, I think, but that seems pretty clear. That's the direction we're moving in now.
And I'll just put it out there to everybody. Cynthia, you might have some insights in this. So my consulting business, which is about 12 years old, I've been doing contract work for all that time, but I've never had either C3 or C4 money in my consulting business. I used to get C3 money when I ran a nonprofit. I usually get paid for the services I deliver as a consultant. So I'm looking to set up an incredibly simple but appropriate financial management system where we can track the C3 and C4 funds, because ultimately it will be my consulting firm, Scale Inc., that is signing the checks for the work that's being done, as well as things like payment for web hosting and video services and things like that. So if somebody has some suggestions about either software or a financial management system that, again, would be really, really simple, but would help us keep those 2 sources of funds clear and distinct as they pass through to accomplish goals, please just holler at me offline. That would be really, really helpful. I'm doing some digging myself. And I'll also mention that the partisan dimension of what we're doing, basically the candidate work, which is pretty essential work, has also led Bill Hogseth to say he has to pull out as much as he supports what we're doing. So many of you have been spending once a month, an hour or so with Bill. He still supports us, but he can't be an active part of the group anymore. He might join us for certain activities and events, but he can't. And so I'm hoping that's not an issue for anybody else on the call.
Well, and so just to clarify though, it's really just that he can't be visible. So we couldn't have him on the website where we had people's pictures, but he's still on the listserv and may, pop in to monthly calls depending on the topic. Yeah.
Great. Any questions, comments, any news from anybody? We've got about 4 minutes left. We can quit early, or does anybody have anything they want to share out with the group and that you feel is important to the work?
I just finished reading an amazing book called The Glass House by Brian Alexander. I don't know if Jen's not on, is she? I thought she in particular might really like it, because it's about how this town in Ohio, Lancaster, Ohio, absolutely imploded over a series of a couple decades, where basically private equity firms went in and conducted hostile takeovers of the main employer, Anchor Hawking Glass, and stripped it and laid everyone off, just did all the things, all the nightmares you hear about. But it's this incredible telling of this story of just what happens over the years to a town when its core employer is just ripped. And I mean, it's like a bomb blew up in that town. It was so unbelievably devastating. He tells a lot of personal stories of the people who used to work there and were either directly or indirectly impacted by it. And I mean, it's really, as I was reading the book, I was thinking, yeah, and multiply this times how many? And this is our country now,
Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, and
Well,
just, no, go ahead, Cody.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
I was just saying, that's exactly what, one of the things that has happened in these towns are those like I said, those factory jobs. Like my mom, like her plant's gone, there's only 1 or 2 plants left in that town. And so, but we're seeing, there's a couple of counties, actually one of them is on our board. It's from one of these smaller towns, but she's had a career in like fighting white supremacy, etc., and moved back to hometown maybe 20 years ago, older lady. But they've been like, we got to replicate what they do in their town. Like they are so smart and they know how to advocate. And so they have actually halted their county commissioners from buying into the same things that some of the other counties have taken that have been dangerous and hurtful to their county. And so we got to figure out how to create those advocates and educate those advocates in these other places. And so that's really also the critical key, is having those educated folks that know how to advocate, which is part of what we want to do.
That's great. Cody?
I was just going to briefly mention a project I'm working on that I think I mentioned in our last session, but I've been working with a consultant out of Longview, Washington, Teresa Purcell, who works all over the country, but we're working on a local project here in Washington State, putting together a series of listening sessions in rural counties, and then packaging what we learn into a legislative agenda for our state legislature. So that's a pretty exciting project that we're putting together. We're just sending off some documents this week to try and get some funding for that project, because we'd like to bring in some staff, some local staff in each of those places to be on the ground. But pretty exciting. Then I think we're going to use those initial listening sessions to try and put together some sort of organizing infrastructure for the rural portions of the state going forward.
Oh, that's exciting. That's great. All right, 2 more things real quick and we'll wrap it up. One is I spoke to Kathy Kramer. You remember she was one of the founders of the group, the author of The Politics of Resentment, wonderful lady in Madison, Wisconsin. She, along with her teaching, is now one of 3 members of a national commission that's been, I think, started by the National Arts and Sciences, perhaps. But in any event, it's rethinking the political economy of the United States of America, which is to say, rethinking the fundamentals of how we structure the economy and the rules, the political rules that either steer in one direction or another. And she and I are going to be talking a lot about that, I think, over the next year. It may be another document on the shelf, but it's got some pretty heavy hitters in the outer circle of it, including Tom Hanks, of all people. So Kathy is working on that, and I'm excited about that, and then that leads me to the second and final thing, which is our next peer learning session at our next Ruby meeting. Hope all of you will attend, and feel free to invite others. It is, that's November 3rd, 3 o'clock. That's the first Wednesday in November. The focus is rural development. What's emerging, kind of innovations and exciting things in rural development, and also what is the current or the potential connection between better rural development and a shift in rural politics and the way people perceive politics, how engaged they are, who they vote for. 2 people, a dear friend and colleague of mine named Kimber Lanning, who is deeply involved in entrepreneurship and everything across Arizona, including the rural area, and Janet Topolsky, who leads the rural development initiatives at the Aspen Institute. I'm going to be kind of moderating that conversation, but I think it'll be really good and take us in a slightly different direction than some of our prior conversations. So I hope you all will be there. Again, feel free to spread the message. We'll get you a Zoom link and all that kind of stuff. So great to have you, Cynthia. Thanks again. And Jalicia, so glad you were able to join on short notice.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. You know, I experienced the rural through my campaign, but now I'm actually, and I know I shared with you the last time, you know, my experiences of really getting underground within the rural communities to figure out how we can get more voters to understand that Democrats are 100% for them. Like Cynthia mentioned, connecting what the vote means into their personal life. But now I'm a part of some community projects, and I have 3 local candidates and a state candidate in the rural community. And I'm still moving forward as we have elections in less than 30 days here in Virginia. So I have learned and gained an extraordinary amount more. And I can't wait till, you know, we have the opportunity to share kind of what I've learned so far now. It's a journey.
Good. We'll look forward to that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we have time, we'll obviously lay the groundwork into that.
Our next meeting is the day after Virginia's big election.
Okay. Well, awesome. Let's
Hopefully you and I will be sober, Jalicia, either.
Right. I was just door knocking this morning in the rain for 5 hours, and then I'm here in front of you guys. So we're out there in the rain, and we're having those tough conversations, and people don't want to get involved, and you are begging them to step outside their door and have to unravel why. And you got to be willing to face the challenges because they feel that they haven't been representative, you know, or there's just the issues haven't been taken care of in this country. You know, it's really how they feel. And I understand that. So as a Democrat, you have to prove that you are for them and that you will be different. And, you know, so it's tough, you know, but being a part of local projects as well as a Democrat candidate also helps within rural. So there's a lot of things that, you know, I've learned. I'm a part of a lot of local great projects that are going on now, like revitalizing an African-American school that was segregated in 1946. They're trying to transition it now to an art and humanities center. And I'm honored. I became a board member, you know, as a Democrat candidate on that. And I've been working with the alumni of the African-American school. So that's when actions. I mean, seriously, you know, we can knock the doors, we can say everything, but now when I'm a board member and I'm sitting in front of you and I'm telling you I'm going to help revitalize and preserve your Black history in this country, now we're talking business, you know, and that's what the Black community is waiting to see. They need to see it. So, you know, that's kind of where I'm staring at, being on the grassroots. So, you know, it's an amazing journey. So thank you, Anthony. I know we're closing, but I'm sure when we come back after elections, I pray that we are sober. I cannot promise you that. Oh my goodness. But you know, we'll definitely catch back up.
Yeah.
Let us know how we can help. I was so worried about California. I jumped on a call. I was making phone calls to California.
Yes. Girl.
Well, thank you. It worked. It worked on behalf of California here. Thank God.
Yes.
All right, y'all. Well, we'll call it, bring it to a close. And again, thanks so much to everybody for being part of this. Everybody take care.
All right. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.
All right, down to aces. Anthony, well, Cody had just chatted